What is the Northern Ireland Protocol? What are its implications for all the state actors involved? And why is it being contested by the UK?
Right. Well, I need to just recapitulate a little bit of history to explain that. The situation on the island of Ireland is that when Ireland became independent in 1922, the northern part of the island, Northern Ireland, 6 counties out of the 32 counties, did not wish to become independent and remained a part of the United Kingdom. That territory of Northern Ireland contained a majority of people who wanted to remain with the United Kingdom, but also a substantial minority who would have preferred independence. And roughly speaking, I would say 60%, 40%, something like that, maybe 65, 35, but those orders of magnitude. So there has always been a great deal of tension in Northern Ireland between these two communities. The majority community feeling threatened by the minority that they would somehow not be loyal to Northern Ireland and that they were constantly trying to reunite with the south of Ireland. The minority feeling they were discriminated against, they were not given equal treatment by the majority. And unfortunately, the distinguishing feature of these two communities was religion. So the majority were by and large of Protestant conviction and the minority were of Catholic conviction. It was not a debate, it was not a fight about religion, but religion was kind of the identifier of the two communities. This led to armed conflict in the late 1960s when a civil rights movement started, which then turned violent. And we had basically nearly 30 years of terrorist violence in Northern Ireland with considerable loss of life, over 3,500 people, which is not a lot seen from a country like Mexico. But compared with the population of Northern Ireland at that time, about 1.5 million, it was quite a lot of people. And the violence affected both communities terribly, and awful atrocities were committed, I'm afraid, by both sides. This was finally brought to an end in the late 1990s by an agreement brokered between the Irish government, the British government, the American government, which played an important role, the United States of America, and the European Union also was involved, whereby the violence stopped and a method of managing the affairs of Northern Ireland was designed, which involved the sharing of power by both communities. At the same time, there was a constitutional guarantee given to Northern Ireland by the United Kingdom, by Ireland, and by everyone in Northern Ireland, that there would be no change in the constitutional status of Northern Ireland without the agreement of the majority of the citizens of Northern Ireland. So this gave a very important guarantee to the majority community, the Unionist or the Protestant community, that their situation would not be changed by force or against the will of the majority. Equally, because the United Kingdom and Ireland were part of the European Union, in practice, the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland made very little difference because there was complete freedom of movement, of goods, of services, of capital, of people. So the nationalists could imagine they were living in a united Ireland because you could treat the island as an integrated unit. And this was the sort of delicate compromise that enabled the peace process to go forward. Brexit, the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union, unfortunately brought all this back into focus because Brexit required the creation of a border between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And the only place there would be a land border between the United Kingdom and the European Union would be on the island of Ireland, because the border with France is a sea border, but on the island of Ireland, the border between Northern Ireland, therefore the United Kingdom, and Ireland effectively was the border between the United Kingdom and the European Union. So this, of course, created new tension because people said, oh, wait a minute, now we're going to put back the border that we dismantled. And this was, of course, very politically unacceptable for many people in Northern Ireland. And people were trying to find a solution. Where were you going to put this border? And there were only three choices. Either the arrangement between the United Kingdom and the European Union did not require a border because there would be a sort of very extensive trade agreement, membership of the single market and the customs union, which would mean basically there was no new border. That was unacceptable to many supporters of Brexit who felt that the UK had to withdraw completely from the European Union, from the single market, from the customs. They wanted a complete break. And that therefore meant that you did have to have a border. And then the only other solution is either a border on the land between Northern Ireland and the Republic, or on the sea, in the sea, so to speak, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And in the end, it was agreed that this solution, the sea border, was going to be the least disruptive to the peace process and to the normal commerce between Northern Ireland and South of Ireland, and between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And also because the infrastructure was there. If you were, there were already some checks on goods coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, some phytosanitary, some veterinary checks, because the island of Ireland was treated as a single entity for veterinary and animal disease purposes. So it was felt this was the least burdensome, and this was the agreement reached at the explicit request of the British government. It was written down in this Northern Ireland Protocol. It set out in a lot of detail how this was going to work, because it was not self-evident to have Northern Ireland remaining an integral part of the EU single market and an integral part of the UK internal market. But of course, it came as a disappointment to the unionist community in Northern Ireland, who saw it as somehow making Northern Ireland a less than full part of the United Kingdom. But it was the consequence of Brexit, and the largest party representing unionism in Northern Ireland had supported Brexit, which came as a surprise for many of us, because it seemed to us, well, if you really wanted the union between Northern Ireland and Great Britain to be held together as tightly as possible, you shouldn't have supported Brexit, because Brexit was going to reopen an old debate. Why is it controversial? Well, frankly, the British government appears perhaps to have signed this agreement not in complete good faith. At least this is what they now seem to say, that they didn't really mean it, or they didn't think it meant what it said, which is a bit surprising because it's very clearly written down. And they have supported and encouraged the unionist community, saying, we want this protocol changed, we want it abolished or replaced with something else. And so for the last, I would say, 2 years, we've been arguing about this, with the EU position being, look, this was the only solution. It took us 4 years to find this solution. It's not perfect, we agree. Maybe some of the practical implementation is a bit complicated, and we need to try to simplify it and try to make it work as seamlessly as possible. But there is no alternative. What is the alternative? The British government persisted in saying, no, it's not acceptable. And they are now threatening unilaterally to legislate to basically abolish the protocol, which the European Union would consider, and I think everyone else will consider, a breach of international law, but more importantly, very damaging to the delicate peace process in Northern Ireland. So that's how we've got to where we are today.
You mentioned the protocol was written as it stands at the express request of the UK. Now we see the UK wanting to change or eliminate it. What is driving this intention?
I think that when the protocol, even as they were signing the protocol, the British government didn't like it. And the suspicion has to be that they were thinking maybe they could find ways of getting out of it later. So they signed it because they wanted to get the agreement with the EU done. And because from the very beginning, when we started, because there were lots of details that had to be worked out as to how this would be implemented. I mean, you can write everything down in a protocol, but on a practical basis, there was a lot of work that needed to be done to implement it. And from the very beginning, the British were very slow to engage in those discussions. They had all sorts of excuses. Oh, we're not ready. We need more time, and so on. So from the very beginning, they have kind of given the impression that they were not interested. They didn't like this protocol. Secondly, they were very supportive of the criticisms of the protocol from the unionist community. Now, you might have expected that since this was negotiated by the British government would have taken some responsibility for trying to explain to the unionist community why they signed it and why it was necessary. Instead, they said, oh, look, the unionist community don't like it. Well, we knew the unionist community. I mean, it was very clear at the time that the negotiation was taking part that this was not a solution that the unionist community felt comfortable with. But the British government felt it was the only solution that could be found. But instead of trying to persuade the unionist community that maybe this could somehow work to Northern Ireland's benefit, and I'll come back to that in a moment, they instantly embraced the criticisms from the union and said, oh yes, look, the unionist community don't like it. Now, as to how this works in terms of British politics, the suspicion has always been that having arguments with the European Union is still a domestic plus for the government, because they constantly try to blame all the problems of Brexit on the EU. And this was another example where they can say, oh, look, this is the fault of the EU. The EU would say, well, actually, this is your fault because you wanted Brexit, and all of this was the consequence of your decision, not the consequence of our decision. So I think there is a dangerous mix of bad faith, of instrumentalizing the legitimate fears and concerns of the unionist community, and playing to the domestic political gallery in England. So those are the three elements, I think, that have made the British government decide to really turn this into a much bigger issue than it needed to be.
If the protocol is unilaterally dismissed, what would be its effects for EU-UK relations within the UK and within the island of Ireland?
The big problem which will result if really we don't know exactly what the British government is going to do, right? They've talked about introducing this legislation. They've talked about basically no longer applying the protocol. But we don't know whether this will be immediate, if, in other words, from the moment they publish, if they will already implement it, or whether they're going to adopt the legislation and say, if we do not get a satisfactory outcome from our discussions with the European Union, we will implement this measure. So those are two different situations. One is where it has immediate effect and they say the protocol is effectively gone. The other is where they say, well, if we don't, we will continue negotiating, but if we don't get the right result, we will abolish the protocol. The effect of abolishing the protocol is to create a massive hole in the external frontier of the single market, because goods coming from the United Kingdom without any check into the Republic of Ireland could then be sold anywhere in Europe. So, for example, if we had food products that did not meet the health and safety standards of the European Union, and for example, if the United Kingdom does a trade deal with some country with lower standards and says those goods can circulate in the United Kingdom, they could then, if there's no border in Northern Ireland, come into the Republic of Ireland and be sold freely elsewhere in Europe. So this is completely unacceptable for the European Union. The British government say that they have ways of avoiding this, but it's very unclear what that would be. And that is why I think we would immediately enter into a period of enormous tension. The European Union has suggested that it might suspend the trade deal, which was negotiated with the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom would lose its privileged access to the European market. That's the extreme outcome. And it does create a big problem on the island of Ireland, because if there are really no checks between goods traveling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, then maybe some kind of check does become necessary on the island of Ireland. And that takes us back to the political problem which caused this whole discussion. The other point I would make, which I think is really important, is there is actually a benefit for Northern Ireland in this deal, which is that Northern Ireland becomes a customs jurisdiction, which is an integral part of the EU and of the UK single market. And all the evidence is that this has proven to be an economic benefit to Northern Ireland. And in fact, the Northern Ireland economy is outperforming the rest of the British economy. And everyone says this is because they have retained membership of the single market through the protocol. And industry in Northern Ireland is saying, actually, we quite like this protocol. It's not a bad idea, because we're able to, we attract more inward investment, we're able to export more. So there is a kind of contradiction between the wish of the British government to dismantle this protocol and the fact that a majority of people, based on the last elections in Northern Ireland, actually want to keep the protocol.
How has the political situation changed in Northern Ireland, and how has it been affected by all things Brexit? And why is the latest election in Northern Ireland relevant?
I think we have to be honest and say that the Brexit and the debate around the protocol have polarized opinion in Northern Ireland, particularly for the unionist community and particularly for the largest political party of the unionist community, which is the Democratic Unionist Party, which from the very beginning supported Brexit, continues to support Brexit, and is bitterly opposed to the protocol. However, they are no longer the largest party overall in Northern Ireland. And the recent election has shown that the largest party is Sinn Féin. And if you add up the votes of other parties, you get something like 60% of people in Northern Ireland voted for parties who basically support the protocol. But, and I think this is important to acknowledge, for the minority Democratic Unionist Party and for the unionist community, a lot of members of the unionist community, they deeply dislike this protocol. So this has really poisoned the relations between the two communities. We have to be honest about that. We have gone back to, we've gone back 10 years in terms of the tension between the two communities. And that is why the Democratic Unionist Party is refusing to cooperate with the creation of a new government in Northern Ireland, which is part of the power sharing arrangements, because they say they will not do this until the protocol is either scrapped or changed. So the protocol has become now a sort of symbol of the tension between the two communities, unfortunately. And many people warned that this would be the consequence of Brexit. This was foreseeable. And unfortunately, what was what we suspected would happen has happened, and it's very bad news for Northern Ireland, unfortunately. When Northern Ireland was created in 1922 as the bit of Ireland that was not going to become independent, it was specifically designed to ensure a permanent majority of unionists. So they drew the line of the border, because there was no border within Ireland. Ireland was a single country, and it had to be invented. And they calculated the size of Northern Ireland on the political affiliation of the people, to make sure that there was a 65% majority in Northern Ireland in favor of unity, and that this would always be like that. It's now 100 years exactly since Northern Ireland was created, and the shock of the election is that suddenly maybe there is no longer a majority of unionist people. Now, I want to emphasize the vote for Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin is the largest party, but they are not a majority. And there is still, if you look at opinion polls, there is still no majority of people in Northern Ireland who want unification with the rest of Ireland. But it does look like the demographic and the politics is moving in that direction over time. And this is why it was a shock for the unionist community, because they always assumed that they would automatically have the biggest party, and they don't anymore. And this came as a big psychological shock to that community.
How is the concern about how the Northern Ireland Protocol could affect peace in Northern Ireland playing out?
Precisely, the argument about the protocol has undermined the peace process, because the peace process was predicated on a power-sharing government, on basically there being a willingness on the part of the Unionists and the Nationalists to share power to govern Northern Ireland. So for many, many years since the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998, the Unionist Party were the biggest party. They had the first minister. The Nationalists had the second party, and they got the second minister, the deputy first minister. And jointly, they had a sort of coalition, if you like, which was mandated by the terms of the peace agreement. What has happened now is that the Unionist Party, who now have become the minority, or the smaller party, are saying, no, we're not going to accept that. We withdraw. We stop all this. So we have a crisis in the peace process precisely because the Unionist party, the biggest Unionist party, the DUP, who should normally accept to take the role of deputy first minister, are saying, no, we won't do that until the protocol is scrapped or completely changed. So they are making further progress in the operation of the peace process conditional on getting rid of the protocol or amending it significantly.
How has the recent decision by the British government related to the handling of crimes committed during the Troubles in Northern Ireland affected local sentiment?
The 30 years of violence in Northern Ireland involved, many horrible crimes. The IRA committed horrible crimes, put bombs in restaurants and bars. Innocent civilians were shot. The loyalist equivalent of the IRA, less active, but still also had murder gangs and murdered people. And of course, there were also criticisms of the police and the army. The most famous is Bloody Sunday in 1972, when the British paratroop regiment went into the city of Derry. There was a protest, there was a parade. They opened fire. At the time, they said they shot terrorists. We now know these were completely innocent people. 13 people were killed. The British government has even apologized and admitted that this was basically the shooting of innocent people by military. And there were starting to be court cases. Some of these soldiers had been identified and were in the process of being prosecuted through the courts. And I think there was a lot of unrest in the United Kingdom in certain circles that their soldiers were now going to be prosecuted for things they had done in Northern Ireland. Therefore, the British government has now come forward with this idea there should be an amnesty for everyone. We forgive everyone everything they did. And this, I think, it's true to say that everyone in Northern Ireland is unhappy about this. The nationalist community is unhappy. I think the unionist community is not happy. It's a very delicate issue. I mean, because many of these things happened a long time ago. People are old. Can you have accurate witnesses and recollection of events that happened 20, 30 years ago? But there is a strong sense in Northern Ireland that the families of the victims of these different crimes are being denied justice of seeing the perpetrators of the crimes actually tried and convicted of these horrible crimes. So that's what the debate. So everyone, the Irish government doesn't like the proposal, the unionists don't like it, the nationalists don't like it. So it's hard to understand why the British government has gone down this road with a proposal which clearly, I mean, I understand. I'm not saying that it's a complicated issue, right? If you look, say, in South Africa, the efforts there after the ending of apartheid, how do you manage the pursuit of justice for the families of the victims without it turning into a kind of situation where you make things worse by repeating all of this? Is there a way of establishing the truth and the facts of what happened, but which promotes reconciliation rather than a sense of retribution and vengeance? This is not simple, and I don't pretend. I'm not from Northern Ireland. I don't pretend to speak for what people in Northern Ireland would want, but I think the British government did not invest sufficiently in talking to the different groups and saying, let's try to find a way of dealing with this, which is not just using the criminal justice system, which may be to a certain extent a rather blunt instrument in trying to deal with the huge sensitivities and the sense of grievance of the victims, of the families of victims who feel that their loved ones were shot or tortured or injured and have had no justice since.
With all the issues we have talked about, what is at stake for the island of Ireland?
For Ireland, the tragedy of Brexit is that it has reopened a debate on issues in Northern Ireland which we thought we had closed. I mean, Northern Ireland is a complicated place with a long history, two communities that are deeply divided, and which we have been trying, over long periods to build reconciliation and peace and rebuilding trust. And it was a very delicate balance which sort of said, look, Northern Ireland shall remain a part of the United Kingdom as long as the majority want. But because we're in the European Union, in practice, it feels like you're living on the same island. When you drive from the north of Ireland to the south of Ireland, the only way you've crossed a frontier is when you get a ping on your mobile phone that says you've changed provider from a British provider to an Irish provider. Otherwise, and this delicate balance worked. Okay, it's ambiguous, right? I mean, each side interprets it their own way. The unionists say we're an integral part of Great Britain. Yes, they are. But it doesn't feel that way, particularly when you're living in the island of Ireland. The nationalists could say, well, we're almost in a united Ireland because, look, there's no border and we all can live and work together. So this delicate balance, which it was hoped over time would bring about a reconciliation between the two communities, the passing of time would heal some of the wounds of the violence and the sense of victimhood which either community might have had. This has now been completely disrupted. Brexit has brought everything back on the table again. All the poisonous issues that we thought we had stopped talking about, suddenly they're back again. And this is deeply disturbing. Obviously, for the south of Ireland, I mean, we have a stake in peace and reconciliation and stability in Northern Ireland. Many people in the south would like a unified Ireland at some point, but everyone is agreed that can only happen through the democratic choice of the people in Northern Ireland. There can be no coercion, there can be no force. Only if and when they are willing to agree to unite Ireland can we have it. So in the meantime, we work with the existing system, which is Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. We work closely with the United Government of the United Kingdom as a partner in managing that complicated situation. And Brexit has broken all of that. It has broken the consensus in Northern Ireland on trying to make that system work. It has broken the relations between London and Dublin. The Irish Prime Minister speaking at the European Parliament in Strasbourg has said we no longer have a partnership with the British government in managing Northern Ireland. That was always the way in which we made progress, and now we don't have that. So this has really been a very damaging process, and all started by Brexit, right? I mean, everything flows from, I mean, we perfectly respect the decision of the British people if they want to leave the European Union, but they have to acknowledge and accept that it has had huge consequences, in particular for Ireland and Northern Ireland, and most of them negative. You know, I'm sure for many people in Mexico, this will seem like a kind of very small problem in the grand scheme of things. With problems, you have in your part of the world, with problems in Ukraine and Russia. But for Ireland, this is a really big issue, precisely because we thought we had succeeded in, if I may say so, burying the ghosts of the past and trying to move forward and look to the future, particularly for young people in Northern Ireland who had not known the violence, that they could focus on building a better place for themselves, their families, their children. And suddenly it's back to the future with this Brexit business. And I honestly, I worry deeply that honestly, the present government in London doesn't actually care about Northern Ireland. I think this is all about their own domestic English, not even British, I would say English politics. And it is being done at the expense, ultimately, of the people of Northern Ireland, which is a huge tragedy.